our society is not just a line in a textbook. It is a shadow that walks with more than a billion people. Some people feel caste it softly, some people feel it sharply, and some carry it like a heavy stone tied to their identity. The caste decides who gets dignity and who must struggle for it. The caste shapes dreams, jobs, marriages, friendships, and even the courage with which people walk into a room. It is a system that did not appear just yesterday. It was designed carefully and it protected fiercely for centuries, becoming a kind of social machine that operates on inequality. In this mission, caste is not just a label, it is a form of social capital. For some, it opens doors even before they knock. Unfortunately for others, the doors are locked even before they arrive. Imagine going through the life with invisible walls around you, the walls that you did not build, but they are expected to obey. That is the story of millions whose humanity has been measured, graded, and restricted by an order that survives by controlling dignity itself. Untouchability did not disappear with modernity. It simply changed its dress. It simply changed its dress. Its cruelty now appears in subtle moments. Who gets respect, who is rejected, who is mocked, who is silenced, and who is celebrated. Humiliation becomes routine, while opportunity becomes a luxury. Generations have carried this burden, passing down, not land, passing down, not the wealth, but memories of stigma, memories of warnings, memories of warnings about danger and strategies for survival. These memories are not old tales. They are living files inside the mind, shaping how a person walks, how a person talks, how a person smiles, and even how a person dreams. The caste order is a total power structure, a kind of invisible government that sits above our society. It governs imagination, it governs mobility, it governs hope. It decides how high someone may climb and how low they must stay. This is not just inequality. It is a system that demands loyalty from the privileged and silence from the oppressed. This system creates fear, obedience, and hierarchies that act like a social password. Some people get access granted and others get access denied. Even today in 2020. From the villages to the metros, from classrooms to the boardrooms, caste speaks in whispers and sometimes the caste shouts. It appears in the way people look at you suddenly, the way institutions behave, the way laws are implemented, and the way society explains failure. Always blaming the victim. Always blaming the victim, always predicting the structure. This is why some call it a form of caste terrorism. A long chain of intimidation that has been normalized so much that people forget to call it even violence. But the 21st century, it has also brought something new. People are no longer willing to sit quietly in the corner of assigned to them. The old narrative of silence. The old narrative of silence. It is breaking. A new awareness is emerging, not just in India, but across the world. Social movements everywhere. Social movements everywhere. They are starting to see caste as a human rights issue, not just an Indian problem. The world is beginning to understand that denying someone's dignity, because of birth. It is not a tradition. It is an injustice. An injustice, once there, begins to lose its sacred power. The purpose of speaking about caste today is not to divide our society. It is to reveal the truth behind the society. When we talk about caste openly, fear loses its power. When we challenge the old rules, courage becomes contagious. When we expose the architecture of upper caste supremacy in institutions, culture, and politics, so that we can reclaim our right to define who we are. This is where a new journey begins. Not a journey of revenge, but it is a journey of recognition. Not a journey of bitterness, but it is a journey of clarity. To speak about caste is to speak about hope. Because every truth spoken loudly weakens a lie that controls us quietly. And when millions begin to see themselves not as victims of system, but as creators of a new social imagination, so the world order begins to shake. The world order begins to shake. Caste has stolen too many lives, too many dreams, too much dignity, but it cannot steal the future. The future belongs to those who rise with awareness, who walk with courage, who stand with others, and who refuse to let their identity be dictated by someone else's prejudice. The future belongs to those who turn pain into power, memory into movement, and history into a new beginning. So, in this century, caste will not disappear by silence. It won't be disappear by silence. It will disappear by truth. It will disappear by unity, by relentless courage. And this courage is already alive in people, in voices, in movements, and in the growing conviction that every human soul, it deserves equality. It deserves respect, and it deserves the freedom to dream without fear. Being a Dalit, in modern India is not just an identity. It is a state of constant negotiation with the world. It is like walking with a torch in a storm. The wind keeps blowing, but the flame refuses to die. Society tries to limit the flame with rules, old rituals, and invisible borders. Yet the light keeps rising. The light keeps rising because survival itself becomes an act of brilliance. Dalit life in today's caste capitalist India. It is not only a struggle over resources, but it is also over imagination, over dignity, over the right to exist with a human face. From childhood, many Dalits discovered from childhood that the world has already written a script for them. The moment they were born, a script is written. A script that says what they can become, what they must fear, what they must accept. But the most powerful moments happen when this script is torn apart and when it is rewritten. That rewriting is what truly defines Dalit dignity. Not the labels, not the limits, but the courage to say, I am here and I am not going anywhere. The urgency of being Dalit today is, it lies in the declaration, a refusal to let society shrink life into someone else's idea. But caste tries to deny history. Caste tries to deny personality. Caste tries to deny creativity and voice. It works like a silent editor, cutting out all the powerful parts from someone's story. It rewrites identity. It steals authorship and demands obedience. But Dalit identity responds like a poet who refuses to stop writing. Even when the ink dries, even when the pages are torn, the story continues in the mind, in the body, in the spirit. Humiliation tries to become the only teacher. Tries to become the only teacher. But dignity, it quietly becomes the best student. Learning how to rise even when pushed down. For generations, Dalits have lived in a strange sense of time, as if the past keeps walking beside the present. Memories of violence, memories of discrimination, memories of exclusion, they do not remain behind. They sit next to people at the dining table, travel with them to school, follow them to work. Yet, these memories also become a fuel, a reminder of resilience passed down like a prized inheritance. Others might inherit money or property, but Dalits, they inherit something even more powerful. That is an unbreakable memory of survival. Society, it often tries to create what can be called a civic debt, a civic debt, a kind of everyday invisibility. This invisibility is not natural. It is constructed. It appears in who is allowed to speak, who is ignored, who is marked, who is celebrated. It appears when talent is doubted, when dreams are discouraged, when achievements are met with surprise instead of admiration. Even in that visibility, the Dalit spirit, it keeps carrying space, climbing voice, shaping identity. When society tries to erase presence, presence becomes louder in silence, stronger in action. This experience of being Dalit, it can feel like living in a zone between time, not fully allowed to belong to history, not fully permitted to imagine the future. But the present, it becomes the battlefield, it becomes the laboratory, it becomes the garden. Being Dalit, it becomes an act of now, a declaration of existence in real time. Every step forward, it becomes a revolution. Every breath, it becomes a protest. Every achievement, it becomes a message that says, I will survive everything built to stop me. Structural violence. Structural violence. It tries to teach Dalits fear, but it ends up teaching them strategy. Humiliation tries to teach them weakness, but it ends up teaching wisdom. Exclusion, it tries to teach silence, but it ends up teaching wise. In this way, Dalit consciousness, it grows not from comfort, but from sharpness, like a seed that grows even in dry soil, like a lotus that rises from mud with dignity untouched. So many Dalits can walk into rooms where they were never meant to stand and they were never allowed to sit. So now they can say, don't worry, I brought my own chair. This spirit, it breaks the rules without breaking the peace. A calm defiance, a confident smile, and a fearless presence. Dalit identity, it is not a story of victimhood. It is a story of victory. It is a narrative of people who were expected to disappear but choose to shine. People who were denied history but became, they were history makers. People who were denied humanity but proved what humanity truly means. Their existence today, it is not the continuation of suffering, but the continuation of resistance. By standing tall, by refusing shame, by claiming space, Dalits show the world that liberation is not a distant dream. It is already happening. Every voice raised, every barrier crossed, every stereotype shattered. It is a step toward a future where dignity is not negotiated, but dignity is guaranteed. The energy carried within Dalit consciousness, it is not ordinary, it is revolutionary. It is the kind of energy that has the power to transform not only the oppressed, but the entire society that once believed inequality was normal. This is the power. This is the power of being Dalit today. A power born from truth, sharpened by struggle, strengthened by memory, and guided by hope. It is a power that refuses to die, that refuses to go, that refuses to vanish. And once this power rises, no force in the world can push it back into life. A powerful change is moving across India, like a quiet storm that suddenly learns to roar. A new generation, of Dalits, they are rising. They are rising not with fear in their eyes. They are rising with fire in their voice. They travel across classrooms. They travel across cities. They travel across continents. They carry a confidence that says this land belongs to us too. They are not waiting for approval anymore. They are claiming space with grace, with intelligence, with creativity, and with courage. This rising generation, it is global in its thinking. They have watched movements around the world stand up against injustice. They have watched movements that shook streets, toppled statues, and challenged centuries of discrimination. These global sparks, they have touched the Dalit conscience. And they have ignited a new kind of assertion. Earlier, the world rarely acknowledged the caste. But now, Dalit voices, they travel across borders with the speed of tweet, the strength of hashtag, and the clarity of lived truth. Social media, it has become the new battlefield where stereotypes collapse and courage goes viral. This neo Dalit movement, it is not built on raw anger alone. It is built on sharp understanding. It is built on bold analysis. It is built on strategic resistance. It is like poetry mixed with philosophy, activism mixed with intellectuality. It is powered by young minds who can discuss Ambedkar and artificial intelligence at the same time. They reject the old idea. They reject the old idea that Dalit must remain silent or they must remain apologetic. This generation, it walks into universities. They speak with a confidence that surprises those who expected silence from them. They challenge cultural dominance. They question appropriation. They break the rules that were designed to break them. The energy of this generation, it became visible when a young student's dream, when a PhD student's tragedy in Usmania University, it became a turning point in the nation's conscience. From that point onward, the country could no longer pretend that caste discrimination had disappeared. It stood exposed. It stood exposed, and the youth refused to look away. What makes this rise even more remarkable is the creativity behind this generation. Neo Dalits, These youngsters, they use music, they use rap, poetry, photography, film, dance, theater, scholarship, and humor to express themselves. Means humor becomes a weapon, a mirror, and sometimes a sweet slap to the system. This movement stands on the belief that dignity is non-negotiable, equality is non-negotiable, freedom is non-negotiable. Dalits are stepping into leadership roles. They are stepping into journalism. Dalits are stepping into policy making, international forums, and cultural spaces with a sense of responsibility. They stand not just for themselves, but for democracy itself. They remind the country that true democracy is not built by loud speeches, but by the quiet insistence that every human being deserves respect. The most beautiful part of this rise is its calm courage. It's a calm, silent courage. It doesn't seek permission, but it seeks justice. It doesn't desire pity, but it demands equality. It doesn't imitate the oppressor, but it redefines power. Neo Dalits are building their own vocabulary, their own art, their own political imagination. They refuse to be trapped by the past, but they refuse to forget it. Instead, they convert history into strength and adversity into wisdom. This wave of neo-Dalit consciousness, it is not a small repeat. It is a tide that is reshaping India's social landscape. It is a reminder that when people who were always pushed down begin to stand tall, the entire horizon changes. Dalits today, they are no longer just fighting for space. They are redesigning the map. They are redesigning the map. They are becoming the protectors of equality, the voices of justice, and the heartbeat of a new nation, where dignity is not granted by caste, but guaranteed by humanity. That is our new India. This rise is not temporary. It is generational. It is not fragile. It is fierce. And it carries within it a truth that cannot be silenced anymore. The future belongs to those who rise with courage, who speak with clarity, and who walk with the certainty that no system can erase their humanity. So, Dalit identity is not a single color on a canvas. It is a full festival of shades, rhymes, stories, dreams, rhythms. It is a universe of experiences, not a small category created by society. For too long, people try to describe Dalits with one word, one stereotype, one image. But when you look closer, you see an entire galaxy of talent, resistance, and imagination. Dalit identity, it is layered like the earth itself, cultural, political, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. So all flowing together constantly. There is a vibrant cultural wave which has transformed Dalit expression into something powerful and something beautiful. Folk singers, poets, rappers, theatre artists, and performers, they are rewriting what culture means in this country. Their voices, they carry history, humor, and fire. They stand on stage and turn culture, they turn centuries of pain into poetry, centuries of silence into song. Oppressive symbols that once dominated Dalit spaces are being replaced with new icons of dignity. The blue flag, It rises where fear once stood. And the message is clear. Culture is not owned by caste. Culture is owned by people. On the other side, political Dalits, they are reshaping the language of justice. They speak with the confidence of those who have read Ambedkar, Pule, Buddha, not as textbooks. They read not as textbooks, but as survival manuals. Survival manuals. These political thinkers, they do not follow the old categories of loyalty. They break the chains. They break the chains of chimcha politics. And they build alliances based on dignity, not imitation. Their political imagination is sharp. Their political imagination is creative. Their political imagination is deeply rooted in social transformation. Then there is the Dalit middle class. An interesting and something confusing breed. It is. This middle class, they walk between two worlds. They walk between two worlds. One world demands aspirations, English education, corporate lifestyle, global exposure. Then the other world, it demands authenticity, connection to community, memory, and roots. They carry laptops and history in the same bag. Their struggle is unique, balancing ambition with responsibility, climbing upward without losing the ground beneath their feet. And when they succeed, when this middle class succeed, they disturb every stereotype that assumed Dalits were meant for the margin. Then Dalit women, they add another extraordinary dimension to this identity. Their strength is a quiet escape. They carry labor. They carry labor on their shoulders, trauma in their memories, and resilience in their bones. They fight on multiple fronts: caste, gender, class. Yet they walk with an elegance that shocks the system. Their agency is powerful. Their leadership is transformative. When Dalit women rise, the entire movement it gains a new heartbeat. And then we have the globalized Dalits who carry their identity across continents. They move between Mumbai and Melbourne, Hyderabad and Houston, Chennai and Chicago. They speak multiple languages. They speak multiple languages. They engage in global human rights in their conversations. They build networks and they challenge caste wherever it travels. Their identity, it becomes a bridge between cultures, making Dalit issues part of global justice movements. All of these shades, cultural, political, middle class, women, they all come together like a giant orchestra. Each group, it plays a different instrument, but the music is one. This diversity is not a weakness. It is a superpower. The movement becomes stronger because it has many doors through which courage enters. Some bring art, some bring activism, some bring scholarship, some bring strategy, and some bring global vision. Together, they create a mosaic that refuses to be simplified or that refuses to be silenced. The beauty of Dalit identity today is dynamism. It's a dynamism. It moves in many directions at once. It grows, it adapts, it reinvents, and it refuses to be trapped in old boxes. It dances between tradition, it dances between modern day. Dalit identity is not a static label, it is a living force, a force that expands with every poem written, every protest organized, every university degree earned, and every song sung, every parallel charted. This richness, it shows that Dalits are not rising in one way, they are rising in every way. Their voices are many, their paths are many, their shades are many, and each shade, it adds a new layer of meaning to what it means to resist, what it means to hope, what it means to fight, what it means to dream, what it means to rise with dignity. The rise of Dalit middle class is one of the most fascinating social changes in modern India. Education opened the doors, English gave the key, and urban life gave the space. Suddenly, Dalits who were once pushed out of schools, they are now sitting in boardrooms, they are sitting in universities, and they are sitting in international conferences. This is not just progress. This is history taking a deep breath. But the journey of the Dalit middle class is not a smooth elevator ride. It is the staircase. It is a staircase with missing steps. On one side, dominant caste do not fully accept it. They may shake hands, but the eyes still measure caste before caste. On the other side, the middle class Dalits sometimes feel like a guest in their own community. They feel like a guest in their own community, caught between aspirations and ethics. This is the double alienation. This is the double alienation. A feeling of being in two worlds, yet not fully belonging to either. Even then, even in spite of all these barriers, they rise. They rise because Ambedkarite thinking gives them a backbone made of clarity. Their activism is not a weekend hobby. It is a life compass. They read Ambedkar not for exams, but for survival. They carry his ideas like armor. However, they walk into institutions that were not designed for them and turning those spaces into classrooms of equality. They start organizations, they lead unions, and they run the cultural foundations, and they mentor the next generation with pride. They become the coaches. They become the coaches. They become the guides. They are becoming the strategists, quietly shaping a new social imagination. But this rise comes with dangers. When someone climbs the social ladder, there is always the temptation to throw the ladder away. Some begin to imitate the very culture that once excluded them. The accent, the lifestyle, the arrogance, the distance. This mimicry, it may bring comfort, but it is also brings a slow disconnection from the people who need them the most. Aspirational blindness. It can turn into a kind of social illusion, making progress look bigger than it really is. One middle class success story. One middle class success story, it can never erase the painful realities still faced by millions. Education remains the most trusted tool. English becomes a sword that cuts through stigma. Digital access, it becomes a stage where Dalit voices finally speak without waiting for permission. A smartphone, it becomes a revolution in the pocket. A way to document injustice, share art, build networks, and create new narratives. The Dalit middle class, they uses these tools not just for personal growth, but for community importance. Their leadership, it becomes important because they stand at a unique crossroads. They stand at a unique crossroads. They know the pain of the past and they know the promise of the future. They understand village realities and they understand urban pressures. They can translate the language of suffering into the language of policy, language of advocacy, language of rights. Their role is not just to rise individually, but to lift others along the way. The greatest strength of this group lies in its potential to bridge the gap between two worlds. The biggest responsibility is to remain accountable. Remain accountable. True progress. It means returning to the community, not running away from community. It means using privilege as a tool, not as a shield. It means remembering that the struggles of the marginalized are not solved by one generation's success. They are solved by many generations of solidarity. The Dalit middle class, they today stands like a lighthouse. It shines because it survived the storm. But its purpose is not just to shine. Its purpose is to guide. To guide the youth, inspire the poor, challenge the powerful, and remind society that rising from oppression, it is not an accident. It is a collective achievement built on sacrifice, struggle, and the unstoppable spirit of dignity. A Dalit entrepreneur starting a business is not just starting a company. They are starting a new chapter in social. Every invoice, it becomes a declaration. Dignity is not negotiable, and opportunity is not the property of a few. This journey is not. The market claims to be neutral, but the shadows of feudal structure, they still follow people into boardrooms and business meetings. Caste networks, they slip into corporate corridors with the confidence of old kings walking into new palaces. Many Dalit entrepreneurs, they walk into these rooms with brilliant ideas and unmatched determination. Yet they discover that the invisible walls of caste, they have simply changed their paint color. The old gatekeepers, now they wear suits, but the gates remain. This is why Dalit capitalism, it cannot survive on imitation. It cannot become a copy of the same system that created inequality. It needs a different engine. It needs a different engine, one powered by Ambedkarite ethics. This means building business with a fairness at the center, with dignity as a policy, not as a fare. It means creating workspaces where no one someday decides their future, where no one is reduced to a stereotype, and where talent speaks louder than privilege. Dalit capitalism, it becomes meaningful only when it stands not as a mirror of neoliberal greed, but as a challenge to caste monopoly. It is not about attacking people. It is about dismantling a system that has sat on the throne of Indian society for centuries and it refused to get up. This system of hierarchy, it is like old software It running the country in the background. This caste system, it is like a board software which is running our country from the background. Even when New India tries to install or uninstall or upgrade, the old program keeps popping up saying access denied. It controls institutions quietly. It shapes economy. It shapes politics. It influences bureaucracy like a guest who arrives early and never leaves. It decides who gets opportunities, who becomes invisible, and who is treated as naturally superior. The power of this system lies in its ability to hide behind culture, behind tradition, behind the movement against this caste hierarchy. It is not a fight for revenge, but it is a fight for balance. It is about naming the structure so that it cannot hide anymore. Once something is named, it begins to lose its magic. When inequality is exposed, it cannot pretend to be culture. When hierarchy is confronted, it cannot pretend to be spirituality. Progressive voices across castes, including many from privileged groups, they are beginning to challenge the same caste system that once benefited. Once they were benefited, now they are questioning the very same system. This is a powerful sign that social transformation is not a private project. It is a collective responsibility. It is a collective responsibility. Together, Dalit capitalism and the critic of caste hierarchy, they create a powerful narrative. One pushes for economic liberation and the other pushes for ideological liberation. One builds new opportunities, the other creates old obstacles. One dreams of a marketplace where everyone stands equal, and the other dreams of a society where no identity stands above another. When these two forces they work together, something extraordinary, the map of the power, the map of power, it begins to shape. The story of our nation, it begins to rewrite itself. The hope lies in this new alignment. Dalit entrepreneurs rising with integrity, progressive allies, dismantling outdated ideologies, and growing consciousness that equality cannot be postponed any longer. The future being imagined here is not a fragile dream. It is determined vision. A future where capitalism is not a trap, but a tool. A future where caste is not a destiny, but a defeated relief. A future where people are valued for their work, not their work. A future where systems serve society, not the other way around. This is the future that begins when economic courage meets ideological. A future where dignity is no longer borrowed from society but built from within. A future where caste loses its power and humanity gains its place. India has fought many battles, but the battle against caste system, it has been the longest. It has lasted for centuries. It has shaped families, it shaped communities, laws, and identity. It began in ancient customs and rigid social rules. It continued through medieval kingdoms and colonial rule. And even today, it still lives in many corners of modern India. This battle has never been a single event. It has been long journey through pain, through resistance, and through courage. Caste inequality, it was once written into everyday life. It dictated work, it dictated status, it dictated dignity, and it dictated access. It controlled who could learn, who could lead, and who could dream. These rules were not just social rules, they became the invisible constitution of Indian society. They shaped temples, they shaped water, they shaped wells, they shaped schools, and even the streets people walked on, they were shaped by these laws. Generations carried these boundaries as if they were permanent walls. The battlefield was wide and it was unforgiving. It was inside courtrooms where early caste cases were documented from the early 1800s. It was in villages where people fought for basic rights over land and over water. It was in public spaces where individuals demanded entry, sometimes facing violence for stepping into a school or stepping into a temple. It was inside legislatures. It was inside legislatures where leaders argued for reforms in 1872, 1909, 1919, 1932, 1947, beyond. Each reform was a small push against a massive structure of pride and prejudice. Caste pride, it acted like a shield. It protected world power. It justified dominance. It presented inequality as tradition. It treated hierarchy as destiny. It convinced many that change was dangerous. This pride slowed every reform. It created resistance in courts. It created fear in communities. It turned the struggle for equality into a long, exhausting war. The story of India. It is also the story of courage. It is also the story of courage. Across 2 centuries of legal records, British archives, census reports, court verdicts, and independent India's new laws, another force kept rising. Another force kept rising. This force was the belief that every person deserved dignity. It pushed reforms like the Caste Disabilities Removal Act in the 19th century. It fueled movements. It fueled movements for temple entry in the early 1900s. It shaped the Pune Act of 1932. It made equality a core value during the making of the Indian Constitution in 1947 to 19. It led leaders to demand reservations. It led leaders to representation and protection. It turned the cries of oppressed communities into constitutional rights. Data across all these years, it shows how deep the struggle was. In British era colonial surveys, they recorded entire regions where certain communities could not draw water from public wells. Court petitions from the 1870s, it showed people fighting for the right to walk on village streets. Temple entry cases from Travancore, Malabar, and Tamil regions, they reveal thousands standing against tradition. Post-independence, the records show that millions benefited from reservation policies in education and public employment. Each number reflects a life. Each number reflects a life, a family, a generation rising because the law finally stood with them. India's social legal journey, it shows a truth that cannot be ignored. When caste pride tried to freeze society, caste equality pushed it forward. When old rules tried to divide new rights, they tried to unite. When discrimination tried to silence, the Constitution tried to lift everyone's voice. This struggle, it has not ended, but it has gained strength. It has gained momentum. It has created leaders. It has shaped movement. It has built a national conscience that refuses to look away. The past tells us that every step towards equality was hard. But it also tells us that progress always defeats fear. Change always defeats opportunity. Hope always defeats the weight of centuries. India moved forward because ordinary people, they challenged. Ordinary people challenged rules that seemed unbreakable. They reclaimed dignity that was denied for generations. Their courage is the foundation on which modern India stands today. In the early 800s, when the British were still studying Indian society, and they are still writing, British are still writing their first legal codes. Their codes often accepted caste hierarchy as a natural part of social order in India. Many British judges and district magistrates, they relied on local customs to decide punishment. These customs came from caste rules, not from equality. Because of these court records from that period, they show punishments that were different for different castes. A person from a dominant caste, he might receive a fine, but a person from a lower caste, he could be placed in public stocks for the same act. You know what are public stocks? They were a wooden punishment device they used in old times. They were set up in the markets or crossroads. The person's legs or hands, they were locked inside them. They could not move. Everyone passing by could see them. It was a form of public humiliation. The shocking part is that birth alone decided who would face this punishment. A lower caste person did not have to commit a worse crime. The only reason for the harsher punishment was their caste. Courtrooms, they followed this pattern because they believed that community hierarchy had to be respected. They assumed that different castes required different kinds of discipline. So the justice system itself became an enforcer of caste pride. This practice shows how deeply caste was woven into India's earliest formal legal structure. It shows that discrimination was not only social, discrimination was also legal, visible, and officially documented. Public stocks were not just wooden devices. They were symbols of a system that treated some bodies as less worthy. Judges struggled. Judges struggled to understand whether an offense came from which caste or which religion. Yet their decision often followed the dominant social order. Legal language borrowed from caste language. Words like pollution, purity, customs, they were entered into British judgments. Some courtrooms, they accepted that a lower caste person could not enter certain places. Others debated whether caste would be treated like a religious category. This confusion allowed discrimination to survive inside the law itself. Physical punishment, it was seen as a tool to protect social hierarchy. It reduced human beings into symbols of degradation. It kept the structures of caste intact through force and fear. Then clothing. Clothing became another battlefield. Upper caste people, they controlled the bodies of lower caste women. Lower caste women dressed to strict rules on how they should dress. In Travancore, this became a major struggle. Women of oppressed communities, they were forced to appear with an uncovered upper body in front of dominant caste groups. Violations brought violence. The violation of this rule brought violence. This led to the breast cloth movement, one of the earliest recorded fights for bodily autonomy of women. Women resisted. Women fought. They walked into public spaces with cloth draped across their chest, even when punishments are severe. Their defense grew year after year. Figures like Nanjali, she became a symbol of dignity in Travancore, India. She was the first woman. She was the woman who chopped off her breast to free women of a horrendous caste. Her stand, it expressed a silent truth. Dignity begins with the body. The royal court of Travancore eventually gave women of lower caste, the right to cover their upper body. After years of conflict, after years of petition, they were given the right to cover their body. This victory was more than a change in dress. It was a declaration that the body of every woman carried equal worth. It was the breaking of one of the cruelest tools of caste enforcement. At the same time, another intense struggle which unfolded around the sati and widowhood. For centuries, priestly authority defended sati as tradition. Conservative groups, they called it sacred. They used ritual purity, caste rules, and social prestige to justify the immolation of widows. Reformers like RajaRao Pagidipalli, they fought this mindset with great courage. RajaRao Pagidipalli, he documented cases. He brought eyewitnesses accounts. He argued that no tradition can be higher than human life. His work influenced Lord William Bentinck, who passed the law abolishing sati in 1849. But the battle did not end there. Widow remarriage remained restricted. Conservative groups, they used caste pride to deny widows a second chance at life. Reformers like Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, he challenged this injustice. He walked through villages. He met families. He convinced leaders that a widow deserved dignity and the right to remarry. His efforts led to the Widow Remarriage Act of 1856. These laws, they marked a major shift. They placed human rights above religious customs. They showed that the law could break harmful traditions protected by caste pride. By the mid-19th century, a new kind of legislation began to emerge. That is the Caste Disabilities Removal Act of 1850. It became the first national law to challenge caste-based punishment. This act recognized a person's civil rights even if they left a caste or if they were expelled from it. Until then, being expelled, it meant losing inheritance, property, and social ended that power. It protected individuals from community control. It recognizes that civil rights, they must belong to the person, not the caste group. This law, it planted the seeds of rights-based, rights-based discourse that would expand in our decades to come. Each movement in this early period, it shows a pattern. Caste pride, it tried to control bodies, it tried to control behaviors, it tried to control punishment and dignity. It used tradition as a shield. It used customs as a justification. Law at first became a tool of this hierarchy. But as reformers, communities, and leaders, they pushed for justice. So, this law slowly turned into an instrument of liberation. Every reform, it became a light in a dark system. Every act of resistance, it pushed society forward. These struggles, talks in public space, clothing restrictions to women, the abolition of sati, rights for widows, and the first laws protecting individuals from caste punishment. They are the early stones. They are the early stones that built India's long road to equality. They remind us that progress rises from courage. They remind us that no tradition is eternal when it denies human dignity. They remind us that justice grows. Justice grows slowly, but it grows with certainty when people stand up for truth. This is the beginning of India's socio-legal fight against caste pride. A fight that continues even today, carried by every voice that believes in equality. Inside Indian society, caste pride, it created its own internal conflicts. Even among communities called the upper caste, there were layers. There were layers of competition, there were layers of anxiety. Each group in the dominant caste, they guarded its status with intense care. In many regions, these dominant castes, they fight for superiority, they fight for a recognition of royal lineage, and they fight for claiming of old trading rights and purity codes. These disputes, they filled colonial records, where community petitions from the 1870s to early 1900s. They demanded the government recognize their true caste rank. Census officers, they struggled because every group they wanted to be seen as higher than the rest. Even Savarnas, they experienced the pressure of hierarchy. Pride created conflict, a competition created insecurity. Every community, it feared sliding down the ladder. As society argued about purity, reformers tried to open new paths. Counter caste marriages, they shook the old order. Ritual reforms, they challenged the monopoly of priestly elites. In the 1870s and 1880s, leaders like Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, he introduced Satya Shodhak model of marriage. Satya Shodhak model of marriage. It used no priest. It used no Sanskrit hymns. It used a simple declaration of equality between husband and wife. In those days, this was revolutionary. It removed the priest from the center of family life. It replaced the hierarchy with companionship. The Satya Shodhak Samaj, it conducted thousands of such marriages across Maharashtra, especially among Shudra and Atishudras, who wanted freedom from ritual control. Orthodox groups, Naturally, Orthodox groups opposed it. They fought. They fought for their traditional place in the wedding ceremony. But the reformers kept moving. Their work weakened the spiritual supremacy that caste pride tried to maintain. Around the same time, the silence around untouchability, it began to break. For centuries, this practice survived without public debate. But late 19th century colonial councils and district boards, they finally started discussing it. Petitions came. Petitions came from oppressive communities across Bombay Presidency, Madras Presidency, and Bengal. They complained. People complained about separate benches, separate streets, separate schools. Leaders like Gopal Baba Valangarkar and Shivaram Janba Kamble, they raised early voices demanding rights for these oppressive classes. Reformers inside the caste system, such as M.G. Ranade and Keshav Chandra Sen, they argued for inclusion. They argued for inclusion. Then Orthodox elites, they resisted every step. They resisted every step. They defended segregation as a tradition. Yet the pressure built. The pressure built. Newspapers began reporting cases where untouchables were denied entry into temples or attacked for drawing water from public wells. These early debates, they planted the seeds for the future mass movements. Marriage across caste lines. It became another powerful site of revolt. Endogamy was the backbone of caste. It kept purity alive. It kept property within boundaries. It protected social rank. When young men and women started crossing these lines, society reacted with fear. Colonial records from the late 800s, they show discussions about making intercaste marriage legally valid. Some provinces even they proposed specific acts. But caste conservatives they opposed them fiercely. They worried that intercaste unions would collapse the hierarchy built over centuries. Many patriarchs they feared that women might marry up, disturbing the balance of power. These anxieties were not only emotional, they were political, they were economic, they were rooted in the fear of equality. Even so, reformers persisted. The 1872 Special Marriage Act it allowed civil marriage without religious rituals. Though only a small number used it at first, it was a bold step. It recognized that love could cross caste. It recognized that marriage could stand on consent, not on caste rules. This idea challenged the core of the system. It showed that society could evolve. It showed that individuals could choose dignity over birth. This entire period, it reveals a society struggling inside itself. High caste, they fought among themselves for supremacy. Reformers challenged the priests. Oppressed communities, they began speaking in public spaces. Marriage became a sign of rebellion. Each conflict, it exposed the fragility of caste pride. Each reform, it expanded the imagination of equality. So, this phase of history, it proves that change is often begins from many points at once. A marriage without a priest, a petition in a council meeting, a community demanding access to well water, a census form where people refuse a lower rank. Every act pushed the system towards transformation. Every voice created pressure on bold beliefs. Every challenge weakened the chains of hierarchy. These movements, they show that equality is not born in a moment. Equality is not born in a moment. It rises slowly from the courage of many. Their efforts remind us that progress is strongest when people refuse to stay silent. Their resistance, their resistance continues to guide India's long struggle for a society where dignity does not depend on birth. Exclusion. Exclusion from public spaces was one of the most brutal expression of caste pride. Streets, waterways, ponds, tanks, and shelters, they carried the full weight of social control. Access to water, access to streets, access to pathways. It may sound simple today, but in the late 19th and 20th centuries, these were battlegrounds. Lower caste people, they were blocked from drawing water from public wells. They were pushed away. They were pushed away from tanks that belonged to the entire village. They were stopped from walking down common streets. Dominant caste, they used violence to defend these boundaries. Many reports from Bombay Presidency, Madras Presidency, and Central provinces, they recorded attacks. These provinces recorded attacks when oppressed communities tried to exercise their basic human right. These conflicts show how rigid the caste system is. Water, movement, and shelter, they became tests of dignity. They became tests of dignity. Access became a symbol of equality. When a person walked on a public road without fear, it declared that hierarchy had cracked. When a community used a shared well, it challenged the entire logic of purity and pollution. Every step into a forbidden space, it represented a small revolution. These struggles, they were not loud or they were not famous, but they shaped the foundation of equality in India. They forced society to confront its deepest prejudices. Provincial legislatures, they began working against these discriminatory customs. Bombay Presidency, it took early steps. Madras Presidency, it followed with efforts to open schools, wells, and public roads to everyone. The central provinces, they also experimented with small quality laws, small quality laws of equality. These early attempts, they often clashed with local customs. Village councils, they refused to comply. Dominant caste elders, they argued that tradition must be protected. Officials found it difficult to enforce change in rural areas where caste discipline was so strong. This conflict between law and customs, it showed how hard it was to break centuries of practice. Some provinces, they began treating exclusion itself as an offense. The idea was simple, but this idea is powerful. Denying a human being access to a public place, it would be treated as a crime. Holy discrimination based on ritual purity, it was challenged by the law. Priests and Orthodox elites, they argued that their practices, they were sacred. Legislators, they argued that dignity was sacred. This clash, it continued for decades. It laid the foundation for a new idea that later entered the Constitution. That is constitutional morality. the belief that equality must rise above customs. This journey, this journey eventually connected with the work of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. In the 1920s, in the 1930s, Baba Sahib introduced early legislative attempts to end untouchability. He drafted bills that demanded access to public temples, public wells, and public roads. He demanded punishments. He demanded punishments for caste discrimination. He argued that equality must be backed by force, not by charity. Many of his proposals, they faced resistance. Legislature, or they diluted the clause. They removed penalties. They passed soft laws that had no strength. Even after independence, many discriminatory practices, they continued because the legal system struggled to implement Baba Sahib's vision. Reports from the early years of the Republic, they show that how caste norms, they refused to die. How caste norms refused to die. Untouchability was abolished in the Constitution in the year 1950, but social habits, they remained strong in many villages. Dominant castes, they still controlled ways and pathways. Many local officials, they looked at it. Some laws lacked enforcement mechanism. This gap between legal ideas and social reality, it became one of Baba Sahib's greatest challenges. He knew that laws alone could not erase prejudice. He believed that society must change. Society must change. It must change its mind, not just its legislature. It progress did come. Every protest outside a temple gate, every march toward a public tank, every court case filed by an oppressed community, each action slowly broke the hold of caste. What began as isolated fights in villages, it transformed into a national movement. The idea that every person has the right to walk, right to drink, right to rest, or right to pray in public spaces. It became part of India's collective moral imagination. These stories, they reveal a truth. Equality does not begin in large parliaments. It begins at a well. It begins on a street. It begins in a small act of courage where one person refuses to step back. As these acts multiplied, India's legal system evolved. As the legal system evolved, society learned to stretch beyond its old fear. These early struggles, they gave shape to the fight for dignity. They built the courage needed for the larger battles that followed. Temple entry, it was one of the most emotional battlegrounds in the Indian struggle against caste crime. It was not only about entering a shrine, it was also about breaking the oldest walls of purity and oldest walls of religion. It was about touching the heart of a system that claimed that God belonged to some and not to others. Long before independence, voices across the subcontinent, they demanded that temples be open to all, especially those who were denied access for centuries. Early proposals, they appeared in provincial councils in the late 800s and 900s. But these proposals, they were blocked by customs, privilege, and the fear of disturbing religious harmony and religious authority. Members of dominant castes, They argued that tradition must remain untouched. They insisted that the temple was a sacred space, guarded by rules, guarded by rules bolder than any moral law. These arguments delayed every attempt at reform. National leaders, they entered this debate with caution. Many of them believed in equality, yet they feared the backlash of upper caste supporters. Their politics, their politics involved careful balance. They spoke of reform, but only where the local majority agreed. They promoted temple entry, but refused to impose it forcefully. This caution slowed the change. It allowed prejudice to survive behind the wall of local consent. It turned equality into a negotiation. It showed how deeply caste pride influenced even the most progressive minds of that time. The most dramatic experiments happened under colonial rule in a princely states. That is, Travancore became the center of transformation. In 1936, the Travancore rulers, they issued a historic proclamation allowing all castes to enter the temples. This act changed the social map of the region. It carried the weight of centuries. It was not just an administrative order. It was a declaration that the divine could no longer be controlled by birth. Leaders like C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, he supported the proclamation. Activists, thinkers, and oppressed communities, they celebrated. They celebrated it across India. The shockwaves, they reached Madras presidency and Bombay presidency, where local movements, they pushed for similar reform. Each region experimented in its own style. Some temples opened their doors peacefully, others witnessed protests, arrests, and resistance from dominant camp. Bombay presidency, it took legislative steps to remove caste barriers in temple management. Madras presidency, it passed orders. It passed orders that encouraged temple entry even before national laws emerged. These early actions, they showed that courage often came from local leaders who refused to wait for national approval. They recognized that equality could not remain as an aspiration. It had to be practiced. It had to be practiced. The turning point came with the Indian Constitution. Equality became a fundamental right. Untouchability was abolished. It was abolished in Article number 17. This was not symbolic language. It was a legal command. It told the nation, this article told the nation that discrimination in public places, including temples, it was now a violation of the Constitution itself. It empowered the state to intervene where tradition violated human dignity. Temple entry, it was no longer a power given by rulers or local community. It was a right. It was a right. It did not depend on consent. It did not require negotiation. It came with the full force of constitutional morality. After the 1950, temple access transformed from a social demand into a legal entitlement. Courts declared that no Hindu could be prevented from entering a public temple because of caste. Governments created rules to implement equality on the ground. Even though social resistance continued, the direction of justice became clear. The law now stood in favor of dignity. These battles, they show how deep the struggle was. Temples represented spiritual belonging. Being denied entry means being denied humanity itself. When people walked through those doors for the first time, they carried the weight of generations behind them. They walked for their ancestors who had waited outside in silence. They walked for their children. They walked for their children who would grow up with a new confidence. They walked for a future where the divine could not be locked behind the caste boundary. Each step was a victory. Each proclamation, each law, each movement, it broke another layer of fear. This journey shows that progress may be slow, but progress is unstoppable. Progress is unstoppable when people rise together. The fight for temple access, it reminds India that dignity must triumph over ritual and equality must triumph over tradition. It shows that courage from one region, it can inspire an entire nation. It proves that justice grows stronger when ordinary people challenge extraordinary barriers. Caste pride, it has always used violence as a tool of control. When oppressed communities, they demanded land, when oppressed communities, they demand wages, when they demanded dignity or equal access, domination often returned in the form of organized terror. Some of the worst massacres in modern India, they happened because people at the bottom, they dared to stand straight. Kilbenmani in Tamil Nadu in 1968. It is one of the clearest examples. 44 Dalit laborers, including women and children, they were burned alive in a hut because they asked for fair wages. The case traveled through the courts, but most of the accused walked. The message sent back to the oppressed was chilling. Lives could be taken without consequences when caste pride felt threatened. The same pattern repeated in Sunduru, Andhra Pradesh in 1991. A coordinated attack. It killed several Dalit men who had asserted their basic right in the village marketplace. Eyewitnesses, they testified. Survivors pleaded. Investigators recorded details. But the justice system moved slowly. Trials collapsed. Acquittals followed. Villagers learned that caste could shape not only violence, but also the verdict. Then Bihar's massacre across the 1990s told the same story. In places like Batani Tola and Lakshmanpur Bate, dozens of Dalit men, women, and children, they were killed by armed groups. These attacks did not come from sudden anger. They were organized. They were planned, they were meant to teach a lesson. And when these cases reached the courts, the families of victims, they faced a system where the police, the prosecution, even the parts of the judiciary, they often carried the same prejudices that ruled the village. Many convictions, they were overturned. Many survivors, they never saw justice. Each acquittal strengthened the belief that caste privilege could commit violence and walk away untouched. Violence became a long race. Violence became a language of intimidation. It was used to enforce silence. It told oppressed communities that pushing for equality could bring deadly consequences. It maintained social hierarchy, not just through belief, but through fear. Every major atrocity in the record showed a pattern. Dominant groups attacked when they felt their power slipping. They attacked when the poor demanded fair wages. They attacked when young people crossed caste boundaries. They attacked when Dalit communities organized politically. Violence became a reminder that the world order was ready to defend itself at any cost. A deeper problem lay beneath this violence. The biggest barrier to justice was the refusal to name the crime. Courts, police, officials, and district administrators, they often deny that caste played any role. Reports turned caste crimes into law and order disturbance. FIRs called organized killings personal disputes. They called organized killings as personal disputes. Charge sheets reshaped collective violence into gang rivalries. This denial took away the real meaning of the crime. It erased the social reason behind the attack. It removed caste from the legal reasoning and replaced it with neutral words that hid the truth. This erasure protected the guilty. It weakened the charges. It made it difficult to use laws like the Prevention of Atrocities Act effectively. When caste motive was not acknowledged, the strongest legal tools were not applied. Survivors felt invisible. They felt invisible inside the courtrooms. Their stories were rewritten to suit a narrative that made society comfortable but kept justice far. This pattern reveals something important. Violence was not only physical, violence was legal, violence was administrative, violence was intellectual. It lived inside the way reports were written, how police officers framed statements, how prosecutors argued cases, and how judges interpreted motives. Systematic denial kept caste violence alive. It allowed atrocities to repeat across decades in states. Yet, even in this bleak landscape, hope kept rising. Survivors continued to testify. Activists documented evidences. Journalists, they exposed weak investigations. Lawyers worked pro bono to reopen cases. Young people from oppressed communities, they entered law schools. They entered civil services because they wanted to change the system from inside. Each person who refused silence weakened the culture of impunity. Each voice that insisted on the truth, it broke the wall of denial. The fight against violence and erasure, it has created a new understanding in India. The country has learned that equality cannot be protected unless the truth of caste is acknowledged openly. It has learned that justice, it requires courage not only in the streets but also inside the courtrooms. This struggle, it shows that even when the law fails, society can push it back to its purpose. This journey, it teaches that when people name injustice without fear, the system has no choice but to move. This part of history is painful. It is also powerful. It reminds us that the oppressor have survived the harshest brutality. They survived the harshest brutality and still stood up again. It reminds us that justice may be delayed, but it is never defeated when people continue to fight for. It reminds us that no hierarchy can withstand the strength of truth spoken generation after generation. The struggle against caste, the struggle against caste and caste pride, it has traveled through courts, councils, villages, and parliaments. So, India has passed strong laws. Strong laws, many reforms have been written with courage, untouchability is abolished, atrocities are criminalized, temple entry is now a right, public access is granted, equality is written into the constitution with clarity and conviction. Yet, even with these achievements, caste pride continues to survive in hidden form. It survives in the silence of institutions. It survives in social habits that refuse to change. It survives in places where law has not yet reached the human heart. Legal reform, it can move fast. It can move fast. But social reform, it moves slowly. Between these two lies the persistent gap that shapes daily life. The law says everyone is equal. Society often behaves as if birth still decides birth. Courts, they can punish discrimination. But prejudice, it continues to operate in whispers, in customs, in marriage choices, in neighborhoods, in classrooms, and even in workplaces. This gap is the real battlefield of modern. It is the real battlefield. It is the quiet space where old beliefs meet new rights. Across this long journey, thousands of unsung heroes, they have pushed the nation forward. Activists who fought for temple entry, rebels who challenged landowners, teachers who opened schools in hostile villages, lawyers who stood with victims of atrocity, students who demanded dignity in hostels and streets, ordinary citizens who spoke when silence was easier. Their courage, it rarely entered textbooks, but they are the ones who carry the idea of equality from paper into living reality. This is the paradox of Indian democracy. The Constitution promises formal equality, but society continues. Society continues to carry layers of structural inequality. Some people start the race with open paths. Others begin with walls. Others begin with the walls around them. Some receive justice quickly. Others fight for years to be heard. Democracy gives everyone a vote, but not everyone receives the same respect. This tension, it defines the unfinished battle. So the journey ahead, it demands constant vigilance. Every generation, they must watch for new forms of discrimination. Every institution, they must reflect on its own biases. Every village must confront the customs it inherited. Every citizen, they must choose dignity over silence. Social transformation is not a single moment. It is a continuous effort. It grows through dialogue, it grows through awareness, it grows through courage, it grows through compassion. India has risen. We have risen many times by challenging the impossible. It broke colonial rule. It built a constitution that started the world with its vision. It created rights that protect millions. It produced leaders who transformed suffering into strength. These achievements prove that the country has the power to overcome every born child. So, the unfinished battle against caste, the unfinished battle against this caste pride, it is the next great step in this journey. It asks for clarity, it asks for humanity, it asks for unity, it asks for courage, and it demands strengthening equality as living force, not just a written ideal. When people walk together, when the oppressed stand without fear, when the privileged choose justice over comfort, the world structure loses its power. The future then becomes larger than the past. So, this is the hope. This is the hope that guides the movement. This is the courage that keeps the struggle alive. The battle continues, not because the challenge is strong, but because the dream of equality is stronger. When we speak about Dalits, we are not just talking about a community, we are speaking about a civilization long experience. An experience where people were pushed down for centuries, yet they continue to fight. They continue to fight. They carried history on their shoulders, pain in their memories, and courage in their brain. Their story did not begin in modern India. Their story began in the deep layers of the past, inside the complex and often cruel systems called caste. Caste did not appear in one day. It was not born from a single event. It slowly grew out of old social groups, tribes, occupations, rituals, and beliefs. Over time, India created a structure where people were not seen for who they were, but for what they were told to be. And once that structure hardened, it became like a wall high, thick, and unbreakable wall. Dalits stood outside that wall for centuries. Inside this system, there were two important ideas. The first one is Varna, second one is Jati. Varna was the word theoretical division like four big boxes of society. But Jati was the real world. Thousands of small groups, each with its own rules, each with its own boundaries, and each with own restrictions. If Varna was the idea, Jati was the lived reality. And it was in this reality that Dalits were pushed to the bottom, treated as if they did not belong, as if they touch their presence, their very shadow carried danger. But the question we must ask ourselves is simple. How did this rigid system survive so long? The answer lies in the way it evolved. Many thinkers tried to explain the origin of caste. Some said it came from race. Some said it came from occupation. Some connected it to religion. Others linked it to political control or ancient rituals. Each theory it tried to offer a piece of the puzzle, but the whole picture it remained complex. A clearer understanding comes when we see caste as a closed class, a group that allowed no entry and no exit. were locked out. Others were locked in. The doors were shut tightly and the key was held by those who benefited from the system. Over generations, this idea of purity, superiority, and separation, it becomes a habit. So normal that people forgot it was man-made. And when a man-made idea becomes normal, it becomes dangerous. It becomes dangerous. Yet, caste in India was not the only system of social division in the world. There are many societies. They have slavery, feudalism, segregation, racial hierarchies, and class divisions. But what made this caste unique was its deep emotional and spiritual justification. It was tied to birth. It was tied to ritual. It was tied to destiny. It was not just social. It was also psychological. It was not just a rule. It was also a worldview. And in that worldview, Dalits were seen as less than human. But here is the truth. We must understand. No system is eternal. No injustice is permanent. And no human being is born to stay at the bottom forever. The truth is visible in the long journey of resistance that began centuries ago. Even in ancient India, there were voices that refused to bow down. The earliest challenges came from the teachings of Buddha. They offered a revolutionary ideas that every human being is equal in their ability to seek truth. They rejected birth-based inequality. They challenged ritual superiority. They created spaces where Dalits could stand as learners, thinkers, even as human beings. Then came the Bhakti movement. The voices of saints who use poverty instead of swords, compassion instead of hierarchy. They sang that the soul has no caste. They sang that devotion is not restricted to any birth. They created a way through Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, and even North India, touching the hearts of those who were pushed to the margins. These saints became shining lamp in the dark age, showing that spirituality can be a force of social justice. Then, during medieval times, and later under colonial rule, new wings entered India. Reformers, thinkers, philosophers, they began questioning the world order. They fought against child marriage. They fought against rigid rituals. They fought against caste discrimination. Some built schools for these are denied learning. Some challenged caste in religious spaces. Some created new organizations to uplift those excluded from social life. Then came Christian missionaries. They unknowingly opened doors to education for many Dalits. Schools became places where they could finally see, read, and write. They can imagine a life beyond humiliation through education. Colonial laws, they introduced ideas of equality before the state. And slowly, the world order began to crack. Through all these centuries, one message keep rising over and over again. They were human. These Dalits were human. Dalits were equal. They deserve dignity. Each moment, whether spiritual, social, or political, they added one more stroke of courage to their struggle. Each voice of resistance, it became a stone that slowly weakened the old walls of caste. each reform, it opened a tiny window towards freedom. Before the world heard the thunder of Baba Sahib's voice, before the constitution carried the promise of equality, there were sparks, small sparks in different corner of India. These sparks, they came from people who refused to accept the fate society tried to write one. They came from Dalits. They came from those who stood with them. Together, these sparks, they formed the early movements that slowly began softening the hardest stone of Indian caste society. So, let's see the early seeds of resistance before Baba Sahib Ambedkar. If we see in Maharashtra, Jyotiba Phule, he planted one of the first seeds of awakening. He did not simply talk about equality, he built it through the Satyashodhak Samaj. He opened schools for those who were denied even the right to learn. He challenged the scriptures and customs that declared Dalits inferior. He lifted their heads and told them, you are human, you are worthy, you can stand up. And for the first time, many among them felt seen. In Kerala, Narayana Guru, he used the power of simple truth. His message echoed across villages. One caste, one religion, one God for human beings. He broke the walls of ritual purity and said that spirituality, it belongs to everyone. For Dalits who were banned from temples, his words were not just philosophy, they were liberation. Then came Iyengar, a name carried with fire. He walked into the streets of Travancore, demanding the right for Dalit children to attend schools. When upper caste resisted, he marched again. When they burned schools, he rebuilt hope. He led strikes. He organized movements. And he told Dalit that silence was no longer an option. Then in Tamil Nadu, area, he rose like a storm through his self-respect movement. Through his self-respect movement, Periyar shook the foundation of caste pride. He said loudly, what many fear to whisper. He fought superstitions. He fought patriarchy. He fought Brahminical domination. He built a culture where dignity was not charity. Dignity was a human right. Dignity was a human right. Across other regions, many Dalit groups also emerged. Adi Dravida, Adi Dharma, and several local caste organizations. They emerged to fight. They tried to protect their communities. They opened schools. They fight for temple entry and they demanded a life of respect. Their names may not be known to everyone today, but their courage, it laid the foundation for a revolution yet to come. But these movements, they have limits. They challenged social treatment. Yes. They questioned rituals. Yes. They fought locally. Yes. But they did not yet have a unified national direction. They did not yet connect social rights with the political power. They opened doors. But the locked fortress of caste still stood tall. The stage was set. But the main voice, the powerful voice had not yet arrived. So Let's see that powerful mind. Baba Sahib. The rise of Baba Sahib, a turning point in history. When Ambedkar entered the scene, everything changed. He brought not just emotion, but Ambedkar, Baba Sahib, he brought intellect, not just protest, but vision, not just anger, but a roadmap. He saw something the earlier movements had missed. That social liberation without political power is incomplete. The Dalits needed not just sympathy, they needed authority. They needed rights. They needed rights, they were written in law. They needed a nation that recognized their humanity. This is why Baba Sahib Ambedkar's movement, it became a turning point. He led from the front. He led from the front when they marched to Mahar to drink water from a public tank, which was a basic human right denied to those people of Mahar. The Mahar Satyagraha, it was not merely about water. It was a declaration. It was a declaration. We exist. We belong. We will not live on the margins anymore. That's the declaration. Then came the struggle for temple entry. They were told they were too impure to step inside. Baba Sahib rejected this humiliation. He guided them to claim their spiritual dignity, to challenge the idea that birth determines holiness. Then, at the Round Table Conference in London, he did not go as a petitioner. He did not go as a petitioner to London. He went to London as the representative of the millions, who have been silenced for ages. He carried the pain, but also the power. He demanded separate electorates so that they could choose leaders who would truly represent them. He knew how political power meant self-respect. But sadly, then came the Pune Pact, a moment of deep compromise forced upon. Baba Sahib signed the Pune Pact to prevent a national crisis. But he did it with heavy sacrifice. And through this struggle, he taught them an important lesson. Even in defeat, dignity must stand tall. Baba Sahib's greatest gift came later, the drafting of the Indian Constitution. He built the foundation of a new India, writing equality into the heart of the nation. For the first time, the law became a shield for those who had no protection for thousands of years. He made the state responsible for justice, not society alone. But he did not stop there. He understood that mental slavery was even deeper than physical discrimination. And so, he offered a new path, Navayan Buddhism. It was not just a religious change. It was a cultural revolution. He told them, you do not need a birth certificate to claim dignity. You do not need anyone approval to be equal. Break the chains inside you and the world outside. It will begin to change. If you change inside, outside automatically will change. With that historic conversion, Baba Sahib turned the centuries of pain into a doorway of pride and self-worth. After Baba Sahib left this world, the path ahead for Dalits, it did not become easier. In fact, it became more complicated. They stood at a crossroads. They had a constitution that promised equality, but a society that still clung tightly to world hierarchy. They had legal rights, but no guarantees of daily living. And yet, they did not stop walking. They continued pushing, speaking, organizing, and dreaming. In the early years after Baba Sahib passed, they placed their hope in a political dream, a dream called the Republican Party of India, the RPA. It was born to carry forward Baba Sahib's vision to unite them under one political banner. For a moment, it felt like the beginning of a new dawn. But slowly, cracks began to show. Internal fights, ego clashes, power struggles. The movement lost its direction. Instead of becoming a strong bridge for their unity, that RPI becomes a symbol of fragmentation. But history teaches a beautiful lesson. When one path weakens, the another rises. And rise it did. That happened in 1972. Like lightning across the skies of Maharashtra. A group of fiery young Dalit writers, Dalit thinkers, Dalit actors, they came together to form the Dalit Panthers. Their energy was electric. Their language was bold. Their spirit was rebellious. They said, we will not whisper. We will roar. They refused to accept caste, refused to accept silence, refused to accept humiliation. The Dalit Panthers, they brought a new message. You have a voice. Use it loudly. They spoke about human rights. They defeated victims of atrocities. They challenged both caste oppression and they challenged government indifference. They inspired a whole generation of Dalit youth to believe in themselves, not as victims, but as fighters. Their courage shook the system. Alongside this rise in activism came another revolution. Dalit literary movement. The words became weapons, poetry became fire, stories became mirrors that exposed the cruelty of caste society and the strength of those who survived. Through literature, they declared our experience matters. Our pain matters. Our joy matters. Dalit literature did not beg for acceptance. It demanded recognition. Across the country, state-wise movements, they also grew stronger. In Maharashtra, Baba Sahib's spirit remained intense. In Karnataka, the Dalit Sangharsh Samiti, it mobilized thousands with discipline and collective action. In Tamil Nadu, Periyar's nationalist wave, it continued to empowering them. In Uttar Pradesh, a new alliance changed the landscape. New political identity. It changed the landscape. In Andhra Pradesh, intellectuals and cultural movements, they shaped new forms of self-respect. Every state had its own rhythm, its own history, its own struggles. But every movement, it carried the same heartbeat, dignity, equality, and self-respect. Yes, even as they rose, they faced a painful truth. Caste division existed inside their own communities. Different Dalit castes sometimes competed against each other. Sub-caste identities, they diluted unity. Political parties preyed on these divisions. Fragmentation became a challenge almost as dangerous as oppression itself. Still, despite these cracks, they continued their journey. Because when a community has survived 2000 years of exclusion, they know how to rise even when broken. Baba Sahib believed something very simple yet very profound. If a religion brands you as an inferior, you must leave it. If a religion denies you dignity, you must walk out. No human being is born to be unclean. No human being is born to be untouchable. This belief guided his decision to embrace Buddhism. He rejected the idea that spiritual truth, it must come wrapped in caste hierarchy. He offered them a new identity, not based on birth, but on choice. Not based on stigma, but on human equality. But why Buddhism? Because it spoke of compassion. Buddhism spoke of compassion. It spoke of rationality. Buddhism spoke of equality. Because it did not carry the burden of caste. Because it empowered them to rebuild their self-worth. Baba Sahib also studied other religions with deep seriousness. But even then, even inside these religions, caste-like divisions, they survived in India. The social infection of caste, it traveled beyond religious boundaries. So Baba Sahib asked, if social equality is not guaranteed anywhere, then where can they today be free? His answer, within themselves, create new identity based on reason and dignity. But here lies a deeper analysis. Caste follows Dalits into mosques, churches, temples, and even into modern institutions. Caste exists in surnames, caste exists in marriages, caste exists in social networks, caste exists in employment. Sometimes, even in the smallest daily interactions, caste exists. This is the hard truth. Changing religion cannot erase caste completely, because caste is not only a belief, caste is a structure, it is a habit, it is a social memory. But conversion does something powerful. It breaks the psychological chains. It gives them inner freedom. It tells them they can choose who they want to be. It gives them a new lens to see themselves not as victims of fate, but as creators of their own identity. The sociological impact of conversion is equally important. It creates solidarity. It builds new communities. It challenges the moral authority of caste-based religion. It demands society to rethink what equality truly means. It disturbs old hierarchies and gives Dalits a new form of cultural and political strength. And politically, conversion becomes a declaration, a loud, clear announcement to the world. We visit humiliation. We choose dignity. When we look at the long history of Dalit struggle, one truth, it shines brighter than everything else. Social change cannot survive without political power. This is why Baba Sahib, he called politics the master. Politics are the master key. He saw something that many people ignored for centuries. He understood that without power, without rights, we remain only on paper. Without power, without dignity, it remains only a dream. Without power, the Dalits would continue to be controlled by those who benefited from the war system. So, Baba Sahib knew that political power is not about ruling others. It is about reclaiming one's own humanity. It is about standing at the center, not the margins. It is about having the strength to say, we belong to this nation as equals. After Baba Sahib, A new political wave began to rise, slowly at first, then with urgency. A new generation of Dalit leaders, they realized that if they must protect themselves, if they must progress, they must enter the world of politics. They must not just vote, they must lead. They must lead. They must not just follow, they must shape the political landscape. And this is where one of the most powerful political experiments in India took birth. That is the Bahujana movement. Bahujan movement. So let's see the rise of Bahujan politics. The idea was simple. The idea was simple, but this Bahujan idea was revolutionary. The majority of India, the Bahujans, they are made up of Dalits, Adivasis, OBCs, and minorities. If they unite, they cannot be ignored. This message created a massive shift. It lifted the political imagination of Dalits from fear to confidence, from silence to assertion. Kanshiram, he became the architect of this transformation. He showed them that political unity is not just emotional, it is strategic. He told them that their numbers are their strength. Their numbers are their strength, and strength must be organized. Out of this vision came a movement, and out of that movement came a new political force, the Bahujan Samaj Party. Then, when Mayawati rose to power, it was more than a political victory. It was a psychological revolution. For the first time, millions of Dalits saw someone who looked like them, spoke for them, and came from their lived reality, become the chief minister of India's largest state. It was a movement. It was a movement that transformed the inner world of many Dalits. It told them, if she can rise, we too can rise. Her era showed that Dalit leadership is possible. It showed that courage can enter the system and sit at the top. It showed that power is not the property of a few. It belongs to whoever has the will to claim it. But even this political journey had its limits. Identity politics offered pride, but not always progress. It created visibility, but sometimes struggled to deliver deep structural change. Leaders rose, but the movement did not always travel equally across all Dalit camps. Internal divisions, competing ambitions, and the heavy influence of money and the heavy influence of caste networks, they restricted its full potential. And slowly, mainstream political parties, they discovered something. Dalits were a powerful vote bank. Instead of empowering them, many parties began treating them as numbers. They treated them as numbers, not as human beings. They offered symbols, they offered promises, they offered welfare schemes, but often avoiding deeper structural change. In many places, Dalit leaders, they were co-opted, absorbed into larger parties and used to attract votes, but never allowed to challenge the core power structure. This is the painful contradiction of politics. Power can liberate. Power can liberate. But it can also be used to control. And Dalits have to learn this lesson again and again. Let's see Dalits under neoliberalism. New hopes, new struggles. Because there came another turning point in the economic changes of 1991. The economic changes of 1991. Liberalization, privatization, globalization, the market opened, foreign companies came in, technology grew, New opportunities appeared, but the new opportunities are not for everyone. The rural economy weakened, agriculture declined, employment in villages shrank, and who was hit the harder? Dalits. They were pushed into contract labors, jobs without security, without benefits, without dignity. They entered the informal sector where exploitation is easy and accountability is low. They worked in factories, they worked in construction sites, they worked in delivery services, sanitation, but they are always working at the bottom of the chain. Neoliberal India, it told them the market will give you freedom, but the market gives freedom only to those who already have power. For Dalits, the market often created more insecurity, more uncertainty, more struggle. Yet, even in this environment, some new possibilities emerged. A few Dalits, they entered business, they entered into entrepreneurship, and they entered into industry. They built companies, they created networks, they formed organizations like DICCI, telling the world. They are telling the world, we are not just job seekers. We can be job creators. Their rise, it showed courage. Their ambition, it showed confidence. Their success, it inspired many. But Dalit capitalism, it also had contradictions. Only a tiny minority could participate. Most Dalits, they remained trapped in poverty and labor. Capitalism, it created winners and it created losers. And the majority stood on the losing side. Economic growth, it created skyscrapers in cities, but also it deepened the cracks in our society. As neoliberalism it expanded, NGOs stepped into Dalit spaces. Some brought support, some brought legal aid, some brought training, some brought visibility, but others, they converted Dalit struggles into projects. They converted Dalit struggles into reports. They diluted the radical spirit of the movement. Resistance slowly became professionalized. The fire of self-respect was replaced by the language of development. The struggle for structural change. It became a checklist of small goals. This shift, it raised an important question. Is emancipation a project or is it a revolution? Dalits have always known the answer. Their journey has never been about paperwork. It has always been about dignity. As time moved forward, a new chapter began. A new chapter began in the long journey of Dalits. The chapter that is filled with fresh energy, new dreams, and new struggle. The world around them it changed, and naturally the shape of the fight also changed. They stepped into spaces that once felt impossible. They found new ways to speak, new ways to organize, and new ways to imagine their future. Their journey, it entered an age where their voices traveled farther and their courage carried greater weight. A new Dalit middle class, it began to be shaped by education, shaped by urban life, shaped by professional opportunity. They walked into universities, they walked into offices, and they walked into industries where their grandparents would never enter. They dressed differently, they spoke differently, and they dreamed differently. These Dalit people, their confidence grew, but so did the tension inside them. They balance their personal success with the responsibility towards those still living in struggle. Their very presence in these new spaces, it challenged old stereotypes. Dalits reminded society that Dalits are not passive victims. They are the authors of their own destiny. Across the ocean, another wave grew, the Dalits diaspora. They settled in countries far away and they built new lives. But they did not forget where they came from. They organized conferences, they wrote books, they created digital platforms, and they brought global attention to caste discrimination. Their courage, it carried the message of equality beyond India's borders. They proved that caste is not just a local issue, it is a global human rights issue. Inside India, Dalit youth became one of the greatest forces of change. Armed with mobile phones, social media, art, poetry, and music, these youngsters they expressed their identity boldly. They used the digital world to expose discrimination, to expose shared stories, and they used it to mobilize their support. They broke the silence. They broke the silence that protected caste violence. Their creativity became activism. Their online platforms became their front lines. They stood up and said, "You cannot erase us. You cannot silence us. We are here and we will speak." Then Dalit women. Dalit women. They are often facing triple layers of discrimination. They emerged as strong leaders. They challenged patriarchy. They challenged caste hierarchy. And they challenged social neglect. They challenged all these at once. Their voices carried both pain and power. They organized movements, wrote stories of truth, and they demanded respect not only for themselves, but for every woman. Every woman facing caste discrimination. Their strength added a deeper moral force to the Dalit struggle. At the same time, Dalit movements began connecting caste issues with education, caste issues with land rights, caste issues with labor rights, with women's safety, environmental justice, and digital. They understood that caste does not live alone. It lives inside every aspect of life. This new intersectional approach made the movement sharper and more inclusive. With every new trend came contradiction. Some moved forward personal success, while others fought daily battles in nature. Some traveled globally, while others struggled locally. Some gained empowerment, and others faced even deeper vulnerability. Still, the movement grew, the movement learned, and the movement reinvented itself. But as the present evolved, the larger question remained. Where is Dalit emancipation heading? The struggle is not just about how far they have come, but how far society has it to go. But despite progress, the majority of Dalits still face the same structures that existed decades ago. Segregation, it survives in villages. Atrocities, they continue in cities. Unequal access to resources, it remains in everyday life. If society does not transform itself, how can their liberation be complete? If minds do not change, how can laws protect them fully? Dalit emancipation, it demands unity. Unity beyond jati, unity beyond subcaste, unity beyond regions. Dalit strength grows when they stand together. Their weakness it appears when they turn against each other. A divided community cannot fight a united system. Their journey also demands class understanding. Caste today it behaves like a class divide, with Dalits on one side and the rest of the castes are other side. True freedom it requires challenging this entire structure, not only in its outer layers. They must also protest. They must also protest to protect themselves from co-option. Political parties, NGOs, institutions, they often approach them for votes, visibility, or fundraising. But emancipation cannot be rented or borrowed. It must belong to them. Their movement loses strength when others controls its direction. It remains powerful only when it grows from within. The path ahead. The path ahead. It requires new imagination. Bold strategies. They cannot solve new problems. Their liberation must be social, political, economic, cultural, digital, and deeply human. Education must lift Dalit's mind. Technology must open doors. Land and labor rights, they must secure livelihoods. Unity must become the greatest asset. Dignity must become the foundation of future. Emancipation is not just about escaping oppression. It is about embracing the fullness of life. It is about feeling joy without fear. It is about walking into any space, self-worth. It is about a freedom that exists not only in lungs, but in everyday breathing, speaking, dreaming, and living. The story of the Dalits, it shows that progress is never a straight line. It is a journey through storms, victories, setbacks, and breakthroughs. But every generation of Dalits, they have pushed the struggle forward. Every movement, it has added its own strength. Every voice has become a bridge to a better tomorrow. They have survived. They have survived centuries of exclusion. Yet, they have risen. They have risen with dignity. They continue to rise, not just for themselves, but for the soul of nation, still learning what equality truly means. So, when we rise, India becomes more human. When we stand tall, the country stands taller. Our journey is far from over. It moves forward with courage, with hope, and with unbroken belief that freedom, full and complete freedom, that freedom belongs to us. Our past, it is painful, but our present is powerful. Our future is bright. We rise. We rise. It is not just a chapter in the history. It is the promise of a new. Political consultancy in India did not arrive quietly. It entered like a force that changed the very foundation of elections. What began as simple slogan writing, event management, it evolved into a multi-layered industry. Multi-layered industry. Industry of data scientists, behavioral analysts, social media strategists, communication architects, and political psychologists. This evolution, it reshaped Indian democracy. It turned elections from spontaneous political contests into professionally engineered operations. This era, this digital era, it marked the beginning of a new political craft. Campaigns became more scientific. Data became decisive. Every constituency, every booth, every voter segment, they turned into a data point. Phone numbers, phone numbers collected at events, they became vehicles for IVRS calls and SMS campaigns. Political consultants, they emerged as new power players who could repackage entire leaders. Behind every banner, there was a structure. Behind every slogan, there was a calculation. Behind every promise, there was targeting. Elections turned into operations driven by technology, driven by propaganda, driven by micro level social engineering. Field workers, war rooms, communication teams, data analysts, and strategists, they merged into one mission. They merged into one mission. Campaigns today, they are emotional factories. They create identity. They create anger. They create hope. They create belonging. They use technology. They use caste patterns. They use local grievance. They use personalized messages. Then fake news, it becomes a tool. Social media, it becomes an amplifier. And every forwarded message, it becomes a drop in a rising tide of influence. Elections are not won on polling day. They are won in silent months before it. In the rooms where messages are crafted. And in the minds where perceptions are shaped. To win an Indian election, one must understand the invisible threads that pull opinions and emotions. Politics runs on narrative, not on noise. Politics runs on strategy, not on spontaneity. Politics runs on preparation, not on promises. Politics runs on the understanding that people respond not only to the facts, but also to the stories, symbols, and echoes of shared memory. Between 2011 and 2014, India entered into a storm. The country watched as corruption numbers, they shook public faith. The 2G spectrum scam, coal allocation scam, the Commonwealth scandal, they revealed shocking figures. These were not simple administrative mistakes. They became symbols. They became symbols of decay. They created a sense of humiliation. That humiliation for nation. A nation which they wanted to progress. The anger did not remain on paper. It spilled into streets. Moreover, in December 2012, the brutal Nirbhaya case, it lit a fire in the hearts of citizens. Young people, they filled the roads leading to India Gate. Water cannons and tear gas meant their demands for justice. Entire cities, they echoed with the voice of a generation that had lost patience. This movement made people look towards politics with urgency. It made people to see that change would not come from silence. During this period of unrest, a parallel force, it rose in Indian politics. He emerged from Gujarat carrying the promise of strong governance, Gujarat model, and development and religious narratives that shaped over years. His Gujarat model showed economic growth, industrial expansion, religious polarization, and confident leadership. So his image became powerful anchor in the political consciousness of the nation. As the 2014 general election approached, politics in India, they entered a new era. They entered a new era. Traditional campaigns, they were replaced. These traditional campaigns were replaced by precision-driven communication strategies. Technology turned into a political weapon. Messages were delivered through hologram rallies that reached hundreds of locations at once. Conversations. Conversations turned into mass connect programs using video conferencing. Social media. Social media became a battlefield. Then short messages, sharp slogans, and relentless branding. They shaped perceptions with the speed never seen before. Then there are slogans. There are slogans like "Achhe din aane wale hai." "Achhe din aane wala hai." These slogans traveled from village to metropolitan towers within seconds. The election did not feel like a contest. It felt like a movement carried by energy, imagery, and storytelling. India saw the impact. India saw the impact on polling day. The final results gave majority to the NDA. These numbers reflected more than votes. They reflected a transformation. They reflected a transformation in how elections were won. Power shifted towards strategy. Power shifted towards communication. Power shifted towards emotional resonance. Narrative defeated noise. Branding overshadowed biography. Before 2014, the India Alliance, it mastered the art of taking every allegation against the Congress party directly into the people. They were able to succeed taking it to the people. It converted every accusation into public anger, every report into a weapon, every failure into a movement. This strategy, it reshaped India's political landscape. It created the wave that carried 2014. But after 2014, when similar scams or even larger allegations emerged, scandals involving billions, controversies involving national security, failures touching every home. But unfortunately, the Congress party alliance, they could not create the same impact, the impact created by NDA. This Congress party, they have the data, they have the facts, they have the material. What it did not have was the communication power. It did not have unified messaging. Congress party did not have media support. They did not build a social media army. It did not drive the narrative with consistency. The ruling party controlled the state, while Congress party, they struggled to find its voice. So the Congress party watched some of the largest scandals of the decade unfold. Yet they could not convert them into public understanding. They could not convert them into public understanding or public outrage or public movement. The failures were not small. They were massive. They carried numbers that could shake any nation. But Congress was unable. They carried stories that could have shaped an alternative narrative. But without strategy, without communication discipline, without a consistent voice, the Congress party remains scattered headlines instead of a people's movement. If we take some examples, Adani Group, the accusations are Adani Group. So it can alone have the force to change the nation's mood. A global report in 2023, it wiped out over $150 billion of market value. A US indictment alleged more than $250 million in bribes for solar contracts. Airports worth 7.6 lakh crore, they were given to a company with no prior experience. These facts should have traveled to every home. They should have become the center of public debate. Instead, they floated in fragments. They floated in fragments. They appeared in some speeches. They vanished in the next. The NDA controlled the narrative. The NDA controlled the narrative. Congress could not sustain electoral bonds. Electoral bonds. They revealed their own truth. They revealed their own truth. Data showed that one party received 6,000 crore out of all anonymous bonds, half of the entire system's funding. But Congress party failed. Congress party failed to simplify the truth for the ordinary citizen. Demonetization. It caused a nationwide shock. 86% of India's cash was wiped out in a single line. The aftermath, it destroyed small business. It cost 1.5 million jobs. Black money recovery was barely 13,000 crores against an estimated 5 lakh crore. The policy became one of the biggest economic setbacks of the modern India. But the narrative went uncontested. The ruling party called it a sacrifice for the nation. Congress could not transform the pain. They could not transform the pain into political consciousness. Then farm laws. Farm laws triggered the longest protest in independent India. Farmers, they sat on roads for 378 days. More than 750 lives they were lost. The laws were withdrawn. This was a turning point. A movement where leadership could have built a movement across states. Congress did not capture that energy. Congress did not capture that energy. It did not build a coalition of voices. The story faded and the ruling party regained control. Then the Citizenship Amendment Act and in the NRC. They shook communities. They shook communities across the country. 53 lives were lost in the Delhi roads. Civil liberties came under stress. The Congress narrative, it remained soft, inconsistent, and slow. It could not turn fear into organized resistance. It could not unify people under a clear message of constitutional protection. The PM Cares Fund. Then the PM Cares Fund. It collected more than 10,000 crore. More than 10,000 crore during COVID-19 global crisis. But they refused transparency. RTA requests, they were denied. The fund was declared outside public scrutiny. They should have ignited a national debate on accountability. Congress mentioned it, but it did not take it as a campaign. It did not take the issue to the people in a language they understood. Congress party allowed the ruling party to frame the fund as a charity rather than a responsibility. Unemployment. Unemployment became one of the biggest failures of the decade. A government that promised 2 crore jobs a year, but it delivered far less. Youth unemployment, it crossed 23%. It crossed 23%. Inequality widened until 1% of Indians held 40% of the nation's wealth. Inflation touched double digits. Everyday life became expensive. These failures, they touched every home. Yet, Congress party, they could not convert this pain into political movement. It did not communicate in a way that felt personal, emotional, or urgent. National security. National security saw deep challenges. The government refused public discussion on that. Yet, Congress party did not build a strong narrative around the need for accountability. Then Manipur. Manipur burned for months. Manipur burned for months. 200 lives were lost. 60,000 people were displaced. Still, the ruling party controlled the national conversation. Congress party could not take the truth to every home. Then mainstream media. Mainstream media, it played its part. Corporate ownership, it shaped coverage. Corporate ownership shaped the coverage. Newsrooms, they depended on government advertising, they zeroed the criticism and injected the polarizing narrative. Press freedom, it dropped to 159th place in the world. Independent voices, they faced riots. Independent voices faced rage. This environment it demanded a stronger, smarter opposition strategy. Unfortunately, Congress did not adopt that strategy. The ruling party ran a 24-hour communication mission. 24 hours communication mission. Congress responded with scattered statements. The result was silence. The result was silence where noise was needed and clarity where confusion was created. Persistence is needed where occasional remarks appeared instead. The failures of the government were not hidden. The government's failures were visible. They were documented. They were investigated. But Congress party failed to turn them into stories that people remember. It failed to speak in a language that touched emotion. It failed to use the tools of modern communication. It failed to build rhythm, repetition, and resonance. So, in today's political arena, truth alone is not enough. Truth, it must travel. Truth, it must speak. Truth, it must echo. When the ruling party mastered perception, Congress did not master communication. So, in Indian elections, strategy is rarely a straight road. Strategy is rarely a straight road. It bends because it bends, it twists, and it turns with every new development. Plans collapse, new plans rise. And once the victory is declared, people look back and stitch together a perfect story, even though the journey was filled with uncertainty. That is the illusion of hindsight. The truth is far more unpredictable. The truth is far more unpredictable. Every campaign lives on instinct, improvisation, and rapid decisions. This new age of elections, they created a new profession, political consulting. A field where young minds became a key players in shaping leaders and shaping narratives. The public, they imagined these teams sitting inside class offices with screens, charts, and perfect systems. This team knew one truth. Elections are not won only by data. Elections are won by creating an atmosphere. It brought young people into rooms where leaders listened, where leaders smiled, where leaders connected. The goal was connection. The team understood that a leader's image can be redesigned with the right ambience, lighting, colors, and tone. It was branding pure and powerful. People wrote their grievances on forms. Each handwritten note, it created personal investment. When a voter puts something on paper, hope awakens. Hope, it pulls them towards the person who received it. That emotional link, it became the campaign strength. Branding in politics does not stop with your own leader. It extends to your opponent. If you do not shape your own identity, your rival will shape it for you. If we take national politics, a clear example is how Rahul Gandhi was turned into Papu. It took a steady flow of jokes. It took a steady flow of memes, mocking videos. It took lakhs of social media pages and WhatsApp followers. Over time, a damaging identity settled in the public mind. That is the cost of leaving your narrative in the hands of your rivals. In political philosophy, Niccolo Machiavelli, he wrote that power is not given to the hesitant. Power is not given to the hesitant. He said a leader must seize the moment because destiny punishes those who wait too long. In the battle for the crown, fortune favors the bold. Fortune favors the hungry. Fortune favors the diligent. It rewards those who accept their path, not those who step back. Machiavelli, he believed that a leader must be willing to claim the throne before others rewrite the story of his character. This principle, it played out in modern India. So, Rahul Gandhi had the chance to become Prime Minister not once, but twice in UPA 1, UPA 2, 2004 and 2009. The UPA won majority seats. The path to power was open. Senior leaders, allies, Congress party, they were all ready. But Rahul Gandhi refused. Not once, but twice. He said he was not prepared to take that seat. He chose honesty over ambition. He chose preparation over coronation. In a Machiavellian words, or in a Machiavellian world, that restraint it became a weapon in the hands of rivals. A vacuum appeared. A vacuum appeared. Into the vacuum, they stepped an entire machinery determined to define him before he defined himself. His rivals understood the rules of perception. They understood the laws of narrative warfare. They flooded the nation with a caricature. They gave the country a nickname. They invested years and crores of branding him as a Papu. A word repeated so many times that fiction became memory. A leader who refused the throne, he was painted as a leader who did not deserve the throne. That is the cruelty of politics. That is the cruelty of politics. If you do not tell your own story in time, someone else will tell your story to others. Even when mocked, he kept walking. He kept listening. He kept loving. 2 decades later, Rahul Gandhi, the same man who was labeled weak, he became the leader of the opposition and was able to revive the Congress party at grassroots level. He walked 4,000 kilometers across the length of India. He walked the 4,000 kilometers across the length of India, not for cameras, but for connection. He shifted the national debate from temples to unemployment, from religion to inflation, from noise to truth. He pressured the government on Rafael and he pressured the government on Adani. He pressured the government on electoral bonds and China's incursions and on the inequality. So when Machiavelli said a prince must be feared or loved, he never imagined a leader who would choose to be understood. So Rahul Gandhi refused the throne until he felt ready to serve, not to rule. He chose integrity over immediacy. The Pappu joke has aged. The real story has not. The narrative was left. The narrative was left in the hands of his rivals for too long. Today, he is writing it himself. But consultants, they were able to create the brand of Rahul Gandhi as Papu, showing there was no strong leader in the party. So, in the world of politics, these consultants and media decides branding. So, media after consultants, media became another battlefield. Consultants, they prepared press releases so polished press releases that journalists copied them without any change. Newsrooms, hungry for content, they accepted these packaged messages. TV channels, they repeated them. Social media amplified them. Sometimes dramatic moments were created only for cameras. A leader walking out of a meeting. A leader walking out of a meeting. A heated exchange at a public gathering. A staged confrontation. All designed to show strength, anger, or compassion. These scenes, they entered living rooms as breaking news, shaping opinions within minutes. It reveals the heart of modern elections strategy. The art of modern elections strategy. It shows that politics runs not on chance, but on crafted perception. It runs on mood. It runs on symbols. It runs on speed. It runs on the ability to stay active, stay visible, and stay ahead of the rivals' narrative. Consultants build atmosphere. Consultants build atmosphere. Atmospheres build leaders. Leaders build victories. And behind every victory, there is a story written not just with words, but with messaging, with imagery, and relentless strategy. Then technology. Technology changed the pulse of Indian elections. Technology changed the pulse of Indian elections. What once depended on loudspeakers, rallies, and handshakes, it began shifting screens towards servers, data dashboards. Every voter, every voter became a data point. Every booth became a target. Every community became a profile. Technology did not enter politics quietly. It arrived like a force. A force that could shape minds, that could influence behaviors, that could move entire states. The rise of digital systems, it created new kind of battlefield. Voter lists were no longer just sheets of paper. They turned into searchable database. They revealed caste clusters, local grievances, and demographic shifts. Then also we discussed phone numbers. Phone numbers for personalized messaging and IVR's calls, because these messages, these calls were reaching millions in a second. Then an SMS blast, it could spread a campaign line across district instantly. The political map of India, it began to move at the speed of data. So parties built technical teams. Political parties built technical teams to track every detail. They studied which age groups responded to development message. They identified which communities cared about water supply, which communities demanded roads, then which villages or which urban pockets responded to nationalism, or which one responded to jobs. Data became a mirror that revealed moods and vulnerabilities. Campaigns used this mirror to fine tune every line, every image, every slogan. Technology pushed political work from the ground into the cloud. Apps, applications, they tracked the attendance of party workers. Applications, They recorded feedback from villages. Apps, these applications, they monitored booth level engagement. Even rallies, they were measured by our digital reach instead of crowd size. A leader's speech, it could gather millions. A leader's speech could gather millions of views within hours. Technology turned every message into influence and every influence into momentum. Data made targeting sharper. Data made targeting sharper. A group of farmers received messages about crop support. A group of youth received messages on jobs. Women received messages about welfare benefits they get. Government employees, they received promises. They received promises about payments. They received promises about their transfers. Micro targeting, it became a powerful tool. It shaped perceptions silently without large rallies or visible events. Data also had its limits. But data also had its limits. Indian records were often missing. The names were repeated, phone numbers had errors, many addresses were incomplete. Tech teams, technical teams, they have to combine digital data with field intelligence. They need eyes on the ground to fill the gaps. They needed local understanding. They needed local understanding to interpret numbers. Technology amplified strategy, but it did not replace human insight. It became a partnership between machines and people. So, social media rose. Social media has risen as the new nervous system of elections. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp, they created direct access to voters. A single message could bypass traditional media filters and reach millions. Videos, infographics, and one-line slogans, they spread through groups faster than new channels could broadcast them. The emotional content, it traveled the fastest. Anger traveled, pride traveled, fear traveled, hope traveled. The most dangerous weapon, it is misinformation. The most dangerous weapon, it became misinformation because fake news did not wait for verification. It moved with speed and created tension before truth could catch up. Every forwarded message, every forwarded message, it carried hidden power. One rumor could discomfort a voter's perception. One false story could inflame a community. Political teams, they understood this danger. It exploited it. They exploited it. They built networks of anonymous pages, social media volunteers, and influencers who pushed their own narratives day and night. Data helped to identify which stories would work, which edits would attract attention, and which emotional triggers would create reaction. Technology, technology also shaped internal party decisions. Winnability, who will win? Winnability, it was now measured with digital tools. Past margins, caste patterns, voter turnout histories, and survey inputs. Survey inputs fed into, they are fed into algorithms. These algorithms, they predict which candidate held stronger appeal. They suggest who should be dropped and who should be promoted. Candidate selection, it became more scientific. The goal was victory, even if it meant tough decisions. It reveals how elections shifted from instinct driven to data driven. It shows how the voter moved from being a supporter to becoming a data asset. It shows how technology can empower a campaign, but also how it can manipulate society. The new political battlefield is silent. The new political battlefield is it is silent, it is digital, it is invisible, but it is powerful. It works without noise, it works without rallies, it works without banners, it works through algorithms that read public emotion and shape political outcomes. So, in this digital era, technology does not just support elections, it defines, technology defines elections. It decides who gets heard, who gets targeted, and who gets influenced. It shaped the stories people believe. It shaped the leaders they follow. It shaped the future of democracy itself. So let's see the impact of fake news. Fake news became the silent weapon of modern elections. It entered Indian politics like a shadow, spreading faster than truth, traveling deeper than facts, and shaping emotions with a remarkable force. It did not need permission. They did not need permission. It did not need approval. Fake news only needed a screen and a moment of attention. A rumor could circle an entire district before the truth even woke up. A lie could reach a village in seconds. It could reach millions in a minute. And once a lie settled in the minds, it became harder to remove the stain. Propaganda, it formed the backbone of this system. Propaganda formed the backbone of this system. It created enemies where none existed. It created heroes where narratives demanded them. It reshaped reality to suit political goals. It fed on fears, it fed on angers, it fed on pride, it fed on identity. These emotions, they became fuel for campaigns. Every platform, it turned into a delivery system. WhatsApp groups, they became factories of influence. Facebook pages, they were multiplied. Anonymous accounts, they produced content that looked real, sound real, and felt real. The line between truth, and fiction, it was blurred. It was blurred. A simple photograph could be edited and made viral. A video clip could be shortened to twist its meaning. A headline could be fabricated in minutes. Once circulated, it sparked debate, outrage, and support. It entered family conversations. It traveled across caste lines. It traveled across religious boundaries. It traveled across age groups. The impact was enormous because people trusted content sent by friends, neighbors, and relatives. Trust became the gateway for deception. Political teams, they understood this pattern. They built networks that operated day and night. They created content that matched the fears of one group and the hopes of another group. They pushed narratives. They pushed the narratives that suited their strategy. Some messages, they portrayed leaders as saviors. Some messages, they portrayed opponents as threats. A false story, it repeated 100 times, began to sound like common knowledge. Perception slowly hardened into belief. Propaganda became a battlefield of imagination. It could show a rival as a corrupt without any evidence. It could magnify a small mistake and turn it into a national issue. It could create division between communities. It could push a message that targeted youth one day and farmers the next day. It could amplify an incident. From one corner of the country and make it feel like a national emergency. It worked. It worked because speed mattered more than accuracy. Reach mattered more than logic. Fake news also fed the politics of fear. A rumor could make a community feel unsafe. A manipulated video could inflame sentiments. A false claim about a leader could damage credibility overnight. Even after the truth emerged, the emotional impact remained. The emotional impact remained. Minds rarely return to their original state after fear touches them. So, propaganda used this principle with precision. This ecosystem, it did not work alone. It did not work alone. It was supported by influencers. It was supported by influencers who spoke with confidence. It was supported by social media trolls who attacked anyone who questioned the narrative. It was supported by pages that look neutral, but they worked like extensions of political teams. Together, they formed an invisible army. They formed an invisible army that shaped public minds. This army grew. This army grew stronger during election season. It created a rhythm of constant messaging. A message at dawn, a rumor by afternoon, a video by evening, a meme at night. The cycle repeated. The cycle repeated every day. It overwhelmed the voter. It created noise so loud that facts were drowned. It shaped the emotional climate of entire states. The power of propaganda, it lies in its consistency. It lies in its consistency. It never rests. It never slows. It builds impressions drop by drop. It enters the mind without permission. It influences choices without debate. It affects voting decisions without confrontation. It turns politics into a theater where perception becomes more powerful than reality. So, winning an election in India, it is never an accident. It is a long, disciplined operation carried out at many levels at